Prova, prova, prova, prova. Si sente? Anche via YouTube?
Viva la
Prova,
gnocca.
prova, prova, prova, prova, prova. Sì? Si sente? Anche via YouTube? Un po' in ritardo.
Viva la
Prova,
gnocca.
prova, prova, prova, prova, prova. Sì? Si sente? Anche via YouTube? Un po' in ritardo.
Viva la
Prova,
gnocca.
prova, prova, prova, prova, prova. Sì? Si sente? Anche via YouTube? Un po' in ritardo.
Viva la
Prova,
gnocca.
prova, prova, prova, prova, prova. Sì? Si sente? Anche via YouTube? Un po' in ritardo.
Viva la prova 1, 2, 3.
Good afternoon, everyone. The talk will start at 5 p.m. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. The event is going to start in exactly 2 minutes, so I invite you to take your seat and we will start soon. Thank you. Allora, buonasera a tutti. 2 parole rapidissime in italiano per cominciare. Innanzitutto saluto e ringrazio tutti coloro che ci ascoltano, sia qui nell'aula magna del collegio che a distanza. Ci tengo a dire, per me è un onore ed è un'emozione moderare questo evento che si tiene nel luogo che è stata la mia casa per 6 anni. Ringrazio il rettore Zatti e tutta l'organizzazione del collegio, ma anche il Dipartimento di Scienze Politiche e Sociali dell'Università di Pavia, con cui quest'anno il collegio ha avviato una speciale collaborazione. Quello di oggi è il primo appuntamento del ciclo Orizzonti, Scenari, Prospettive e Sfide nel campo della politica internazionale. Si tratta di una rassegna di incontri su temi legati agli affari internazionali, osservati da vari punti di vista. Vi invito a seguire gli aggiornamenti sui prossimi eventi di questo ciclo, che proseguirà per tutto il corso dell'anno accademico. I now switch to English, so good afternoon everybody, both online and in presence, and welcome to the Aula Magna of the Collegio Fratelli Cairoli. Besides my alma mater, the University of Pavia, the Social and Political Studies Department and the whole Collegio Cairoli organization that I have already thanked in Italian, I would like to thank also the World Politics and International Relations community, both professors and students, who showed up in large numbers today. This English language, highly international degree program closely follows issues such as the one we are going to discuss today, and attracts students from Turkey and from other Middle Eastern and Asian countries. The School of African and Asian Studies within the University of Pavia has a long tradition, and this conference is just the latest example of this. Finally, I would like to thank the Vice Consul General of Turkey in Milan, who is following us online. And we hope this will be an interesting and stimulating opportunity for debate and insights on his fascinating country. I will just briefly present today's guest speakers. Mrs. Professor Valeria Giannotta obtained her PhD at Milan's Catholic University, and since 2009, she has been active in Turkey, where she has served as academic in Istanbul, Gaziantep, and Ankara. And as an expert of Turkey, she contributes to media and think tanks, and she engages in high-level strategic meetings. For her analytical objectivity and effort in support of the Italian diplomacy in Turkey, in 2017, she was awarded as Cavaliere dell'Ordine della Stella d'Italia by the Presidency of the Republic of Italy. Her last book, Erdogan and His Party, AKP, Between Conservatism and Reformism, has been listed among the best current politics essays of 2018, and it's just one of her numerous publications on Turkey. Mr. Professor Francesco Mazzucotelli has been teaching Middle East and post-Ottoman space-related topics in a variety of settings, including academic and non-academic ones. He currently teaches history of Turkey and the Middle East at the University of Pavia. He holds a PhD in political institutions from Milan Catholic University and has previously studied at the American University of Beirut. Among several publications on the Middle Eastern and North Africa region, he is the co-author of a Guide to Middle Eastern Politics. As you all know, this conference, which will actually be more of a talk between me and our two guests, rather than a traditional lecture, will be followed by a question time for both online and in-presence audience. So you're welcome to ask your questions. We will investigate contemporary Turkey and its outlook for the future. 2023 will be an important year for this country as general elections will take place. The outcome of this election will surely shape, as we will see shortly, Ankara's strategy for the next years between new international ambitions and the reinforcing of its regional policy. Despite being often overlooked by both media and academics in Italy, Turkey is extremely important for our country and the EU as a strategic partner. Italy is Turkey's fifth trading partner, while Ankara is Rome's biggest commercial partner in the Mediterranean basin. If this was not enough, it is worth it to remind that Turkey has been a member of NATO since 1952, and it's currently its second largest army. Hence, I would like to conclude my short speech with the wish that this talk might contribute to arouse the interest of the Italian people for this country, as well as to foster the already strong relationship between the University of Pavia and the Turkish student community in Italy. Thank you. So I will now ask my first question to the speakers. And my starting question will deal with the elections that will take place during 2023 in Turkey. So why could 2023 be such a turning point for Turkey? How the social and political polarization that Turkey has been witnessing recently can affect the outcome of the election? And finally, I would ask you to briefly outline the main challenges on the domestic sides for both Erdogan and his opponents. Thank you.
So before starting, I really would like to thank all of you for being here tonight and for the invitation to be in such an amazing place. And I must admit that I felt a bit emotional to come back to Italy and at university level. Well, we are going to speak about Turkey, or Türkiye, as now the new word has been recorded within UN. And we are going to speak about the 2023 elections. 2023 is a turning point, as Filippo has already mentioned, because it has two meanings. First of all, in 2023, Türkiye will celebrate the century since the foundation of the modern Republic of Türkiye, as it has been conceived by its founder, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. So there is this very strong symbolic connotation. But in the same time, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who has been leading the country since 2002 with his Justice and Development Party, AKP, before as prime minister, and since 2014 as president, and since 2018 as a president within a presidential system, has this main target to overcome the Mustafa Kemal Atatürk by establishing and strengthening the project of Yeni ve Güçlü Türkiye, which means the new and strong Turkey. The main idea indeed is just to give a different connotation of Türkiye, in a way that Türkiye is more based on conservative values and nationalistic values. And to some extent, it contradicts the main assumption of the foundation of the Republic of Türkiye as a secular state, as it was convinced, as it was interpreted by Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. And in his attempt, actually, Erdogan, since 2002, has tried to normalize some of the political discourse or political logics that has been considered sort of dysfunctional within the Turkish political system. So in the first tenure of his mandate between 2002 and 2007, we can see a very strong reformist behavior according to European Union reforming agenda, for example. And the main asset of AK Party policy was to normalize and to rebalance the relations between the army and the civilian power. Between 2007 and 2011, we have been witnessing a more assertive politics within the domestic scenario. And from 2011 to 2014, Erdogan has reaffirmed his position, and the position of the stance of AK Party and the Party and Development Party, Justice and Development Party, is becoming much more dominant, if not predominant, within the Turkish domestic system. And then starting from 2000 until nowadays, we have been living within a presidential system, which is unfortunately affected by a very weak system of check and balance. It's a sort of a presidential system alla turca, where the president is more or less controlling any sort of area of the social life, civilian life, and he keeps the power within his hands. Of course, in this political scenario, the distance between the center of power and the people has been changed a lot. If in the first steps of AK Party, the main strength, I will say, of the party was to be a party and a government for the people and within the people, and providing some services to the people and to Turkey. Over time, this logic has been changed. And nowadays, Erdogan is more distant from his own electorate as well, comparing to the first mandates. Now, we are heading in elections of 2023, which is most formally will be held in 18th of June. Already, we are witnessing a sort of electoral campaign, despite the fact that the electoral campaign did not start yet, but there are some moves and movements within the Turkish scenario, and also the unfortunate terrorist attack that we witnessed 2 weeks ago in Istanbul has been used and manipulated, if we want, for electoral campaign in order to get some support, because also this nationalist rhetoric and narrative is always is working very well within the Turkish political spectrum and regarding to Turkish society. And we have been witnessing this since long. Erdogan has been able, anytime the country experienced crisis, terrorist attack, for example, in the 2015-2016, or the coup attempt in the 15th of July 2016, Erdogan, who knows very well the psychology of the Turkish people, has been using always a sort of rhetoric and narrative in order to compact the electorate support. Nowadays, of course, his support and his party's support is declining a lot. Therefore, we can expect that this terrorist card, I mean, the terrorist rhetoric, this harsh rhetoric against terrorists and in support of the unity of the state will be, I mean, rightly used also in order to gain support. But what is, I think what is on the stake nowadays, and when we speak about polarization, is a new dimension of the polarization that has been existing within the Turkish political scenario. Since the foundation of the modern Republic of Turkey, we had a sort of traditional polarization between state and religion. This very harsh and very strong interpretation of state and secularism, and on the other side, these requests by the conservative people to express themselves. because actually the Turkey as a state has been structured as a sort of a top-down legitimacy. So there was a sort of elite, political elite controlling the state and giving a certain direction to the country according to specific principles such as secularism, unity of the state, republicanism, and so on. And any time those main pillars were considered under threat, the army was legitimate to intervene in order to repressinate the order according to the constitutional principles. And on the other side, the Anatolian masses, let's put in this way, that they were carrying sort of religion symbols, they've been emarginated by the political and sociological game in Turkey for too long. And here comes the real strength of Erdogan, that since the foundation of his party in 2001, and then when he came to power in 2002, was able to normalize also this kind of discourse. But nowadays, beside this traditional polarization, we are witnessing another sort of polarization. I tell you this why, because if we look at the parties that they are just competing for these new elections, we witness two different blocks. In one side, there is Erdogan's party, together with the Nationalist Movement Party, and together with the Umperinjek party, they created the Alliance of the People, while all the other main parties within Turkish political spectrum got reunited, and mainly there are 6 parties, the so-called Table of 6. They got united in order to contrast, in order to oppose to Erdogan. The main problem today is that we see, thank you, Francesco, Meral Akşener, who is the only lady in this bloc, and she's the leader of E party, so center-right party, and she has already a tradition within the Turkish politics, and she got very close. Actually, she comes from the nationalist roots. And then there is Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, who is the main leader of CHP, the so-called, the traditional party coming from Mustafa Kemal Atatürk heritage. Karamollaoğlu from Saadet Partisi, which is a party with clear Islamist roots. Ahmet Davutoğlu, who has been the Minister of Foreign Affairs under AK Party, under Erdogan rules. And then he became also Prime Minister in 2015. And a couple of years ago, he went out from the AK Party and he has created his Gelecek Partisi, Future Party. Ali Babacan, who is another who has been another leading figure within the AK Party. He has been the Minister of Economy and before Minister of Foreign Affairs within the AK Party. He has been known as the architect of the economic miracle of Turkey in 2001, 2007, more or less, who went out from the AK Party, from Erdogan's party, and he founded his DEVA Partisi. So both Ali Babacan and Ahmet Davutoğlu, they are center-right parties as well. And then we have the Democrat Party. Now I forgot the name of the leader. So those parties, they just came together and they made this table of 6 with the main task of just taking support from the AK Party. And the main idea is to repristinate, to put again back to the Turkish political system, the parliamentary system, because they believe that the main problems related to the democratic maturity of the country nowadays lays in the fact that we are living within a presidential system. Basically, we are in this situation, so a new polarization, a polarization between pro-Erdogan or anti-Erdogan. The main problem nowadays, according to my understanding, is that this table of 6, till now, they haven't been able to propose a candidate yet. It can be because, according to their visions, they belong to different groups. They belong to different ideologies. So it's very difficult to come together with a just unique name. The second reason is because Turkey, within this presidential system and where everything is pretty much controlled, can be also a strategy. Like if I propose now a name, they might think, then this candidate, they can be burned. Because on the other side, there is AK Party and the Nationalist Bloc, that they are in the predominant position. They are leading and they are controlling everything. The main, according to me, this is my personal doubt and my personal concern, is that since they come from different roots, for example, until 2018, that it was the first experiment of a coalition against Erdogan, it was unthinkable for Turkey to have an Islamist party with the CHP, for example, with the Kemalist and Republican Party together. So since there are different ideologies in the same party, the main concern is that if one day they may win the elections, what will be in Turkey? I mean, it will be so easy to go back to the parliamentary system. This is the first question mark. The second concern is it will be a real stability. There will be a real stability in the country because it may create the condition for a sort of clash of power within the coalition as well. And already Turkey, but Francesco knows better. I mean, I will give the word to you now. Francesco knows better than me that any time Turkey has experienced coalition government, there was crisis in the country. Indeed, the real strength of AK Party was to give birth to the first experiment in Turkey of just a unique party government for a country. When they come to the challenges, and then I will give you the stage. According to me, the main challenges in Turkey are mainly two, that they are overlapping as well. The first one is the economy and finance issue. So nowadays, Turkey is suffering a lot, and there is a sort of dysfunction between the economic growth of the country, which is still positive, and the financial condition of the country. Currently, there is a very huge and high inflation rate. According to the last numbers, we are above 85% of inflation rate, but realistically, we believe that it goes beyond 100% of inflation rate. And there is a very worrying devaluation of the Turkish lira, the local currency as well. And nowadays it's been stabilized around 18.6 against euro and dollars, but because there are some backstage just movement in order to keep the local currency stable. And then the second main issue that is overlapping also with this economic discontent of the Turkish society is the issue of refugees in the country, and mainly the Syrian refugees. I think all of you know that Syrian refugee policy has been a sort of a diamond policy of Erdogan, and it was a policy that useful also to grant and to get some sympathy in the international arena as well, by saying we have been hosting more than 4 million refugees since 2011. And we dispersed, we invest a lot of money on this, but according to the economic conjunction, to the fact that many people are getting unemployed, so there is a high unemployment rate, and the sort of general discontent in the country. There are coming out also a sort of anti-Syrian approaches. And here, of course, it comes the main issue of the inclusion of those people that they are living within the country, because there are more than 4 million. Some of them, they are born in the country. So some of them, they are growing up in the country. And of course, there is no longer-term policy. I mean, Turkey has been developed a very short-term policy because Ahmet Davutoğlu, the foreign minister at the time, believed that it was just a temporary crisis. But anyway, the government has welcomed those people, and now there are fragile and sensitive issues. And then, of course, as the terrorist attack of 2 weeks ago underlined, there is also a problem of stability. Stability as a spillover effect of what's happening beyond the borders, and mainly in the Syrian territories. I think I spoke too much, so I leave the word to Francesco. Thank you.
Thank you, Valeria. Good evening, Yashamlar. Thank you to Collegio Cairoli, Professor Zatti, and Filippo, and all those who are helping to organize this conversation we're having tonight. Thank you for the introduction. I will probably be shorter because I agree very much with many points already raised by Valeria, but let me start with one consideration. 2023 is an important date for Turkey because it marks 100 years from the foundation of the Republic. And it's a symbolic landmark for the country and for its national identity and history. We've seen a lot of events going on about the 100th anniversary of the Lausanne Treaty, which is a sort of foundational moment for the modern country. So yes, 2023 is a landmark year because of the election, but it's also a turning point because of the unavoidable debate about the identity and modern history itself of the country. As Valeria mentioned, it will be a double election, presidential election. As Valeria mentioned, it's a president with full executive powers, no prime minister. And it's also a parliamentary election with a proportional representation system and an electoral threshold of 7%, which means that any political party that gets more than 7% will obtain seats in the National Assembly. But there's a sort of technicality in the electoral law that helps coalitions, in short. So that's also helping to bring these huge coalitions together because it's expedient. It's helping to get more seats. Also, there is a sort of legal loophole for independent candidates. As Valeria mentioned earlier, Recep Tayyip Erdogan has been and still is a very polarizing person. And this polarizing effect has obviously an impact on Turkish politics. And with all the obvious differences, I would like to discuss tonight how there are similarities with other countries and other political contexts that we've seen in these last years, whenever we have highly polarizing political leaders. And the trend becomes to have the leader's party, which is highly personalistic, which becomes an electoral machine relied all around the leader, and this huge opposition coalition, which takes a little bit of everything, including sort of left, center, right, as we've seen, Islamist and sort of secular parties. When we see other cases? And this is probably also a question that I would like to ask to you and perhaps discuss with the public tonight. When we see the examples of Hungary with Viktor Orban, or Israel with Benjamin Netanyahu, we are watching similar cases of highly polarizing political leaders and opposition coalitions that are a sort of very huge cocktail where the only glue, the only element that brings these different parties together is the opposition to the incumbent, to the outgoing leader. And we've seen in Hungary, it didn't work. And we've seen in Israel, it didn't work, because when you have Meretz and Naftali Bennett in the same coalition, it might work during the election. You might win the election, but as you mentioned, Valeria, the day after, when you have to rule the country, what's the agenda? And that's exactly the problem with the Bennett and then Yair Lapid cabinet in Israel. What do you do about the sensitive issues whenever you have Kılıçdaroğlu and Babacan and Davutoglu and Meral Akşener? What will be the agenda on the main issues? The sensitive topics. As you mentioned, one of the major points is let's get back to a parliamentary system without this overarching precedent of the republic with a full executive authority. Let's go back to a system where there's a prime minister, which is, you know, responsive towards the National Assembly and legitimized by the confidence and supply from the National Assembly. Will that be enough? We are seeing a lot of opinion polls in the last months. It's no secret and no surprise that so far, until now, many opinion polls are sort of favorable to this opposition coalition. Because there's a lot of unrest and dissatisfaction, I argue, mainly because of the dire economic situation in the country. What will happen from now till the election day? Number one, what happens is anyone's guess. Number two, I think there is still an open question mark on the agenda. As you mentioned, there's different sensitivities and different political histories, different political cultures when it comes to the relation with the European Union. I would argue that Saadet Partisi or the İYİ Party perhaps have a different sensitivity than Ali Babacan or Ahmet Davutoglu. The Kurdish issue, whatever we want to call it. This is, again, the uncomfortable issue on the table that, however, needs to be discussed. Will the Kurdish electorate have, you know, a sort of decision maker in the next election? In, let's say, the swing electoral districts, and the position of these parties to this issue, and to even possible indirect arrangements with HDP is very different. These six parties, I guess, have different positions and feelings. And then there's the economy, which you already mentioned, and I think it's important to remind for our conversation tonight, the situation in the country has been characterized by a collapsing currency, as we saw here in the last 4 years since the crisis in the summer of 2018, with loan defaults, high inflation rate, account deficits, and the situation of the economy can be defined as close to stagflation in these terms. So what do the main actors, including the very same Recep Tayyip Erdogan and the AKP, want to do with the economy of the country? What has been observed since 2018 is a political conflict between the executive power and the central bank about, for example, the control of interest rates. This has been the main bone of contention, whether the interest rate should be low or high. It remains to be seen how the situation evolves. Yes, you mentioned the refugee questions, because we tend to forget in European Union countries that the number of Syrian refugees in Turkey is probably somewhere between 3 and 4 million people. And the accommodation that was meant to be short-term, even in non-camp, non-refugee camp accommodation, with the inclusion of refugee children in the Turkish school system, public school system, is becoming difficult to manage. This is a question that is impacting on other neighboring countries as well. When we see it, the situation in Lebanon or Jordan, about the number of Syrian refugees and the prospect. There are some attempts at resettling them into Syria, and the accounts of resettlement policies are largely problematic for obvious reasons, because the military part of the conflict in Syria might have subsided. Perhaps there are regions where there is no fighting anymore, but the situation has not come any close to a final settlement. So the presence of such a high number of refugees in the country is obviously a burden. And we've also seen a number of instances of clashes, of anti-migrant, anti-refugees narratives in the country, which stem from, the everyday hardship of managing such a high number of people in a situation where the short-term perspective doesn't hold true anymore. And just to close this first round of thoughts, I think the economy has played a big role in the political debate over the last 4 years. I guess it will be one of the main points that will be discussed in the electoral campaign. But as in many other countries, the situation, the overall international situation is in such a state of flux that it is almost impossible to make predictions. And whenever we are trying to guess what will be the outcome, we have to be honest enough to recognize that the factors who was discussing a war in Ukraine 1 year ago, and who was foreseeing the impact that the war in Ukraine has on the economy and the politics of many countries, not excluding Italy.
Thank you, Francesco. I just wanted to clarify some points. For example, now we are seeing the map of Turkey and the Syrian refugees in Turkey. They think that we call them refugees, but they are not formally refugees when we speak about Syrians, because they are people under temporary protection. Turkey did not sign the Geneva Convention, so those people are not refugees. And as the term says, it's just people under temporary protection. And within this frame, within this definition, Ankara and Brussels signed in March 2016 the so-called refugees agreement that basically was forecasting a sort of financial support given by the European Union to Turkey by recognizing the giant, I will say, effort in hosting and keeping those people there. Of course, they weren't money given to the government, but they were applied to certain projects. And on the other side, the European Union and Brussels also made some promises to Turkey, such as the liberalization of a visa for the Turkish people towards the Schengen area, facilitating Turkey's accession process to European Union. And we should remind here that Ankara is a candidate member since 1999. And in 2005, Turkey has become, the negotiation has started in order to join, to become a full member of European Union. I want to make a sort of polemic out of this in a way that the negotiation, yes, started. In that time, the country was a totally different country. If we look at the democratic maturity and the liberal maturity interpretation of the policies within the country, but the negotiation got stuck since the very beginning because of the Cyprus issue. So out of 35 chapters of the negotiation process, Turkey till now has been open and closed just one chapter, and sort of 17 chapters has been frozen because of the veto applied regarding to the Cyprus issue. What does it mean, Cyprus issue? It means that just a couple of months before the starting of the negotiations with Ankara, Cyprus has been accepted as a full member of European Union. And we all know that Cyprus is a divided island within a Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, which is not internationally recognized by any country except Turkey. But this brings with itself a lot of problems because anyway, there is a UN mission going on, peacekeeping mission going on since the 70s. And this is an unresolved dispute. But despite this, European Union has accepted Cyprus and the Greek Cyprus as the main representative of the island. And of course, when you have unresolved issues and unresolved problems, this creates a sort of spillover effects on several other dossiers, right? And starting from that point, actually, in the most recent time, we have been seeing a sort of different treatment by European Union towards Turkey, which is, on the other side, has changed a lot since 2005, since the starting of the negotiation, according to democratic interpretation, then several problems, several line of fractures, further polarization. And the approach of Brussels towards Ankara has become a sort of approach towards a third country. And also this agreement related to the Syrian refugees can be read actually in within this frame of third country. And then I will give you the floor very soon. But when we spoke before about opposition and government, I did not neglect to mention the role of the pro-Kurdish party HDP, which exists within the Turkish political system. The HDP has not been accepted within the table of 6, despite there was some negotiation going on. Because as Francesco mentioned, there are some different stances and different opinions regarding the Kurdish issues within the table of 6, the main opposition blocs. On the other side, we have been seeing the AK Party recently flirting with HDP in order to get some support. And mainly they started with they started to discuss and to negotiate about, again, the turban issue, the headscarf issue, which has been one of the main pivot issues also in the, I will say, the diamond policy of AK Party since the foundation. But the HDP, and I would like to remember that the co-founder of HDP, Selahattin Demirtas, has been in jail since 2016, did not accept to negotiate with any of this bloc. And it seems that nowadays is sort of making compromise with some anti-systemic, I will say, far leftist parties that they are existing in Turkey, but they never entered the parliament. You mentioned rightly the threshold of 7%. And this is a new issue. It has been a reform. It has been applied recently. And I will say also silently, because we did not read many news related to that. I want just to remind that before 1 year, if not more, the threshold in Turkey was related to 10%. And that was, again, a sort of threshold that was put in place by the military junta in the 80s. I mean, when the military and the army had a role within the Turkish political system. I promise I stop here. So now you can go to the second question. Thank you.
Not a problem at all, because it was actually very interesting, and you partially shown with your interesting insights on the Turkish political spectrum and the main domestic challenges the country has to face, how the domestic situation is closely related to regional politics in general. So my second question is also related to this, and I would ask our two guests to try and evaluate the impact of Erdogan's role as a mediator in the Russian-Ukrainian conflict on the domestic political situation. So I would like to know what are, in your opinion, the main challenges and opportunities stemming from this role. And of course, if we mention Turkish-Russian relations, we should also probably briefly discuss about the situation in Syria, where Russia is clearly drawing back at the moment, since it is very busy on the Ukrainian field. Thank you.
I think there is a risk that I'm going to talk too much, so you go first.
Okay, we'll try to be a little quick and rough as an attempt at answering your question. I think there's obviously a side of addressing foreign policy issues in terms of selling success on the international mediation arena on the domestic scene. You, Filippo, mentioned Ukraine, Syria. We could mention other places such as the Caucasus region or Libya, where Turkey or Turkey plays an important role. And in all of these arenas, it is difficult to disentangle what's going on the local scene from the broad vision of Turkish foreign policy. So I guess here we have people that are more familiar or very familiar with the lines of Turkish foreign policy over the last decade, and people that are less familiar. When Valeria mentioned the idea of güçlü Türkiye, of strong Turkey, that means the economy on the domestic level, but also a more assertive posture in the international arena. One of the leaders that we've seen at the table of six, Ahmet Davutoglu, was formerly a prime minister and the minister of foreign affairs. And when he used to speak about strategic depth, he mentioned the idea of a country that was not just the last carriage in the train. A Turkish state that could have its own, how can we say, its own autonomous foreign policy that could claim and assert a role of regional middle power in the Black Sea region, in the Middle East, in the Eastern Mediterranean, and in Africa. And I guess, Filippo, this is the main point. What we're witnessing, not just in the last weeks, but over the last maybe 10 years, is the attempt of having a strong foreign policy where there's this constant, not just having zero problems with neighbors, which is a formula that has been discussed over and over, and which I wouldn't be ironic about. It has been, you know, a sort of goal of foreign policy and the vision of a strategic vision, actually, that was meant to take, in my opinion, to take the country out of a sort of isolated position and build closer relations in the Balkans using different tools, including soft power, to enhance relations and enhance Turkish status in the global map of foreign relations. Humanitarian aid through government and non-government agencies was used as a tool of foreign policy. There's nothing surprising. Every major country does that. And perhaps we should ask ourselves why we are surprised that Turkey does what other major or middle powers do in the international arena, which is to use every tool you have in terms of trade relations, in terms of cultural relations, of TICA or cultural heritage as tools to foster closer and more stable foreign relations. So yes, we're watching a lot of protagonism from the side of Recep Tayyip Erdogan in the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. Turkey or Turkey is not a secondary player, also because of the interconnection of Turkish and Russian interests in the Black Sea region and the Caucasus and the Middle East. And also because of the role that weapons play in bilateral and multilateral relations. There's an entire discussion that could be made on anti-missile battery being sold from Russia to Turkey in previous years. There's a whole discussion that could be made about the Bayraktar drones used in the Ukraine war in these months. But I guess there is nothing surprising when a country claims to have the possibility of playing a role that is not just secondary. After all, it's the Black Sea region, and why shouldn't Turkey have a say in what's going on? And if I can answer in a bit of straightforward way to your question, what's going on in Syria since 2017 is a sort of political agreement between Turkey and Russia. And more than the military developments on the field, which occurred, which took place, obviously, there is a political undertone in the developments of the Syrian conflict since 2017 and 2018. We cannot seriously conceive any major development in the Syrian conflict without the role played by Russia and Turkey. And whenever we look also at the land military operations in the northeast of Syria, and the arrangements that, well, kind of sensitive topic these days, but when we look at the arrangement that stopped the Operation Peace Spring, if you remember in the fall of 2018, well, the main point was political arrangement between the Turkish and the Russian side. So, and similar considerations can apply also to the Caucasus region when we look at the not so frozen conflict in the Karabakh or Artsakh region between Armenia and Azerbaijan. These are all interconnected pieces of the puzzle. And I wouldn't say that the protagonism on the international arena is something that is done just for domestic consumption because there's the election, and so you want to credit yourself as a sort of peacemaker. There's a little bit of this layer, but of course, as any major country, Turkey has some sort of national interest, and I would argue the main interest is of stabilizing its border and fringe regions, which leads to a pragmatic sort of friendly and not so friendly relation with Russia, which follows the ups and downs of the general scenario.
Thank you. Would you like to add something, Professor Giannotta, on this issue?
Yes, there is a lot of food for thought. Thank you, Francesco. Definitely, I will start from the point that the international agenda of Turkey and the domestic analysis of Turkey overlaps, right? So it's always a matter of national interest for Ankara, the strategic move that it takes in the region and also internationally. And on the other side, Erdogan is very able to use the regional agenda and regional stances of Ankara for domestic purposes as well. You mentioned the fact that Turkey has his hard power and soft power. I will say that is a smart power. I mean, we have been witnessing more assertive policies in the region since 1 year, and more recently, Ankara has opted for a more diplomatic approach and has started several normalization process with historical competitors in the region. My mind goes to Israel, to Armenia, also paradoxically, to Egypt. Still the talks are behind the scenes, but there are negotiations going on and so on and so forth. Why? Because Ankara and this government has realized that keeping the stability and the status quo in the region is fundamental. And also the stability, when we speak about stability, it comes the negotiation between Russia and Ukraine and the mediation role that Ankara is trying to play. Since the eruption of the war, actually Ankara, thanks also to the personal contacts of President Erdogan with the Russian counterparts, Vladimir Putin and Zelensky, is being able to, or at least tried to mediate. It was possible at the margin of Antalya Diplomacy Forum last February in Istanbul as well. The 2 formal delegations coming from Russia and from Ukraine sit on the same table, and still, I mean, the Turkish diplomacy is working in this sense. Of course, Ankara has a direct interest both in Russia and in Ukraine. When it comes to Moscow, it comes also to my mind the energy issue, economy issue, the fact that many tourists are populating the Mediterranean coast of Turkey. And Ankara knows quite well what does it mean breaking the connections, having a crisis with Russia, because it experienced this not long ago, just in 2016, 2015, 2016, after the down of the Russian jet by Turkey. So when the relations got frozen, there were some, I will say, dramatic outcome also for the stability of the country, but in terms of the economy or in terms of energy as well. And nowadays, when the energy has become a very hot potato, hot issues, not just for Turkey, but in the whole region, keeping the balance is compulsory. On the other side, of course, Turkey has adopted for a sort of pro-Ukraine neutrality. It means that it recognized the fact that Ukraine has been occupied by Russia. Turkey has been also supporting Ukraine with drones and with some other military forces that they are doing the difference actually in the warring scenario. And also there is another specific topic which is very close to the Turkish government, which is the Tatar community populating the Crimean Peninsula. And basically also related to this war, Turkey is hosting a lot of people escaping from the war. On one side, on the other side is hosting, by not applying international sanction to Russia, is also hosting some Russian people and also accommodating some Russian capitals within the country as well. Of course, when it comes to Syria, any Turkish step cannot be taken without the acknowledgement of Moscow, of Russia. It has been clear since the 2016, in the time the bilateral relations were very hectic. They were frozen, we'll say they were not in a good shape. But when Ankara started the so-called Euphrates Shield operation, it was clear that Moscow said, yes, you can go. Of course, when we speak about Syria, the main task of Turkey is to neutralize, or as the Turkish government says, clean up the border by the direct threats posed towards Turkey, against Turkey. And when we speak about threats, the main idea goes to the PYD, which is recognized as the Syrian sister organization of PKK, which is a terrorist organization, recognized as such not just by Ankara and Turkey, but also by the United States and European Union. And recently the list have been updated and the PKK is still in the list as a terrorist organization. So for Turkey and for the Turkish people as well, the idea of having some terrorist organization populating the border and creating a sort of spillover effect within the country when there is a threat coming from PKK is not so pleasant. So here it comes the main need, I will say, of create a sort of security belt along the long Turkey-Syrian border, which is an important border because it's long more than 900 kilometers. And so after what happened in Istanbul two weeks ago, of course, Turkey has retaliated by bombing and by targeting some sensitive points in northern Syria. And nowadays there is this rhetoric and these statements by the President Erdogan saying we are ready to carry out a ground operation in Syria in order just to secure our border again. Of course, we should consider also the time. I mean, because as I said before, the international regional agenda overlaps with domestic policy as well. And we know that in the past, this kind of operation has been sold in a sort of narrative in Turkey, useful to recompact the electoral support as well. I'm not saying that everything is done just for electoral purposes, but I mean, they can be used domestically for political purposes as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So my following question would be related with the regional policy of Turkey, because it has been, as you've been mentioning, it has been changing in the last few years, and countries such as the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, or Israel, that used to be Turkey's regional competitors, are now more of regional allies. So how is the Turkish grand strategy in the so-called enlarged Mediterranean changing, more specifically, and maybe more shortly? And at the same time, what are the main differences between the historical approach of modern Turkey to the region and Mr. Erdogan's new Blue Homeland doctrine? Thank you.
We'll go very shortly because I think I already answered to this question. I mean, we enter a new phase, like a sort of normalization process with some historical competitors, such as also some Gulf countries as well. It's a matter of realism when in realpolitik when we speak about Turkish policies in the region as well. So national interest, the fact that from those countries there are several and very important investments within Turkey as well, and it's a matter of stability. We needed to remind that until 1 year ago in the Gulf, the main interlocutor of Turkey was just Qatar. So now that the situation is more or less stable, so the normalization process is going on. I will say that this normalization and diplomatic approach is paying off. The main problem lays with Greece, I will say. So with Greece, after a very hectic and thorny summer 2 years ago, a sort of roadmap was established in order to normalize the relations, but it failed. I think that the main debate here lays on the fact that in considering the economic exclusive zone both by Greece and by Turkey, and basically, as the map shows, Turkey has very long Anatolian coast, which is more than 1,600 kilometers. And Turkey would like to consider the economic exclusive zone starting from the ground, while on the Greek side, they consider starting from the islands. And for example, when we look at Castellorizo Islands, Maze, which is just across Kaş, which is one of the best summer spots of Turkey, is just far away 2 kilometers from Turkey. So this creates a sort of, I think, dysfunctional approach. And we shouldn't neglect the fact that Greece has militarized the island by contradicting the main assumption of the Italy-Greece agreement signed in Paris in 1947. But of course, when we look at the big picture, Greece is a member of the European Union, right? So it is in a dominant position and there is not much to lose. And not also a big interest to negotiate, because already it has everything. While Turkey has been suffering, as Francesco said, by this sort of isolationist approach. which creates a sort of domestic dysfunctionalities as well. And I think this tension between Greece and Turkey, of course, has some historical backgrounds, but is going to be used as well for some political purposes too. I mean, within the European and the regional frame as well. Thank you.
I don't know if you watched the opening act of the World Cup 2022 in Qatar, and the Emir of Qatar, Tamim Al Thani, was on the stage with Infantino from FIFA and Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. This is a scene that was unthinkable 5 years ago, when Qatar and Saudi Arabia were on the brink of open conflict because of the different position of the two countries vis-a-vis Iran. Now, 5 years later, the two paramount leaders of these countries are sharing the same stage in sort of sport washing event, which signals a different stage of not just diplomatic, but political relation between the two countries and within the Gulf Cooperation Council. So what happened in between? Did they fall in love with each other? As Valeria mentioned, it's realpolitik. It's the change in the regional arena that prompted a rapprochement or coming closer between these two countries. And you know, sometimes it's hardcore pragmatism that is changing the politics and the regional policy making in the region. Sometimes we tend to look to search for huge ideological drivers when there's much more pragmatic leverage through national interests or short-term gains for the international actors and for the political actors inside each country. I'll try to be short here. I think one of the problems is sometimes we tend to think in terms of landmarks, like in terms of watershed events. But the policy in the region is in a state of flux. We've seen a lot of divisions and acts of coming closer, but it's extremely difficult to claim there's a, you know, like a sort of final judgment in the relation between those actors. I'll try to be a bit clearer on this point. We've seen, for example, the Abraham Accord between Israel and the United Arab Emirates. Where is this leading to? It's too early to predict the outcome. It's a phase. We're seeing a lot of phases where these actors can diverge or return in some sort of closer cooperation. And we perhaps should leave it at that, as a perpetual state of flux, where all these actors, countries are navigating this turbulent arena. There's a number of words, of labels that are used, that have been used in the last 10, 12 years to describe the foreign policy, the Turkish foreign policy, for example. And there's a lot of talk about neo-Ottomanism, which, Valeria, we might discuss about that. It's sold in Europe as a sort of refoundation of the Ottoman Empire tomorrow morning, which is not. I mean, again, neo-Ottomanism might be defined more properly as the use of soft power, as the use of history and cultural relation, in part for the domestic consumption, for domestic arena, and in part as a form of soft power. But again, we should take all these labels and slogans with a pinch of salt. I would like to ask very briefly 2 remarks before getting perhaps to the questions. Consideration number 1, studying international law is useful, and it makes sense because it helps us to understand very practical dynamics. As Valeria mentioned before, Turkey has signed the Convention of Geneva, the original one, but not its annex, its second enlarged version. So the definition of refugee that is accepted by the Turkish side is the original one from the Convention of Geneva, which was related to the former, let's say, Soviet and communist countries at that time. So by not signing the second version of this convention, the practical result is that people coming from Syria are not recognized as refugees, not because there's a sort of legal impediment, but because the definition itself is different. And so there's sort of framing the situation through temporary shelter or temporary protection. And again, this case we're watching on the map. The Turkish state did not sign the Montego Bay Convention in 1981 on the right of the open seas. So the definition of open sea borders and economic zones that is defined by the 1982 Montego Bay Convention is not something that Turkey has signed or even ratified. And that's why Turkey claims to have this blue part of the Eastern Mediterranean as their proposed exclusive economic zone. Again, this idea of the blue homeland can be just a slogan. It can be reduced to a sort of cheap and quick label. In fact, it has been endorsed by an admiral of the Turkish Navy, but this doctrine boils down to the idea that Turkey must have a naval power and is a regional player that has interests in the Black Sea and the Eastern Mediterranean. Perhaps it's not useful to get into the technical details, but again, the practical results are very important because there are huge parts of the Eastern Mediterranean where different littoral states, including Greece, Turkey, and the Republic of Cyprus, have different claims. And most of these waters have seen a lot of explorations for gas fields in the last years. But the main obstacle to the exploration of these gas fields is nobody knows exactly what country they belong to. And no energy player wants to invest money in exploring and digging out gas in waters where you do not know whether they belong to the Republic of Cyprus or Turkish extended claims or Israel or Lebanon or whatever else. So we are not, talking about philosophy here. There's a very practical problem in the demarcation of economic zones in the Eastern Mediterranean. And most of the moves of these actors are linked to the exploration of these huge potential, huge resources in the Eastern Mediterranean. And again, just as an attempt to close the point and leave the floor to some questions, the ongoing issue of the exploration of gas fields has been boiling since 2017. What Valeria mentioned, this standoff in the summer of 2020, was linked to the demarcation of the national waters of Greece, Libya, Turkey, between the islands of Cyprus and Crete. And this is important because one of the main projects is, after you explore gas fields around Cyprus and you take out the gas, how will you transport the gas to the energy markets in Europe? You either build LNG, liquid gas facilities in Cyprus, or you have to build a pipeline under the Mediterranean. But you do not build a pipeline if you do not know who is controlling these waters in the Eastern Mediterranean. And this brings us back to the previous question, and I think makes us realize that everything is sort of interconnected. For example, I am not an expert in this issue, not an expert on anything probably, but definitely not on this issue. The cost of building a gas pipeline between Cyprus and Crete is extremely huge. So because of these chaos in the demarcation of exclusive zones and the technical impediments of building a gas pipeline under the surface of the Mediterranean, the project was nearly shelved. Then there's a war in Ukraine, and suddenly European countries realize the need for diversification of gas supplies and moving away from Russian gas. So all of a sudden, these gas fields and their exploration and development become crucial again.
Thank you very much for your very clear answer to both of you, actually. And yeah, I will now give the floor to our audience, both here in the Aula Magna and from home. If you have any questions, you can write them in the comment section if you're at home, or you can ask for the microphone if you're here live with us. So please. There is one from the, there is actually two from the Aula Magna.
So in the case that is energy in the war, with the Pacific challenge, occupy Halep and Mosul, or will be Aleppo and Mosul, like in Syria and Iraq, for continue the line from Antakya to the border with Iran.
Okay, we will now get one more question and then they will reply to two of them. Then we'll go on with the other ones.
First of all, thank you for your seminal speech and seminal thoughts for sharing. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. I have. Okay, thank you. First of all, thank you. And I want to ask you something about a very contested concept, which is very popular, at least some part of Western literature. I think it's very contested for me, the axis shift. And ever since the democratic backsliding and Turkey's soaring relations with West emerged, Turkey has been facing allegations with axis shift from the Western Bloc. And what do you think when you consider the great power politics in the conflictual zones in Middle East and the Eurasian region, including the Ukrainian war? To what extent this concept will work and will reshape the Turkey's relation with the West in the near future, and to what extent in next elections again? Thank you.
We'll get one more question from the Aula Magna. Actually, there is the lady in 5th row. But okay.
I would like to ask you about, in the next elections, do you think how important it will be about the anti-immigration politics? You know, with Ümit Özdağ's new party, there is a populist movement. There's a populist movement against immigrants, and what do you think? Will they achieve some percentage of the votes, or is it going to be in vain? That's it.
Okay, I'll start with the first question. Perhaps we can disagree a little bit, Valeria, because we've been so boringly in agreement so far. I don't think Turkey has really an interest in occupying Mosul or Aleppo. I mean, as was mentioned before, there's a clear interest, as I see it, in stabilizing the borderline and in preventing real or alleged infiltration of paramilitary activities from PYD or PKK from the northeast of Syria into Turkish territory. This is the idea of, you know, these groups being existential threat to the stability and survival of the Turkish state. In terms of really, and I would mention that there's also clear Turkish support to the opposition groups in the Idlib region of Syria, including Islamist groups. But in terms of actually occupying large parts of Syria, I am a little less sure about that, because one thing is having this sort of buffer zones or stability zones along the border. If we look at this map, is really a green rectangle along the border is a strip of land. But having larger, if I understand the question right, having larger annexations of regions because in the past they were part of the Ottoman Empire, I'm less sure about that. Yes, you see, you know, sometimes maps of Turkey, including the Mosul area, but whether this is real policy or just a narrative or propaganda, I think it's more the second one than the first one. And also, I think we should mention that the relation between the Turkish state and the Kurdish regional government in the north of Iraq is a good relation in terms of trade relations. It hasn't been particularly problematic. I would say the relation between Ankara and Erbil is a sort of stable relation. Of course, there are open questions like the status of Kirkuk and the Turkmen ethnic group inside the north of Iraq. Whether the Kurdish regional government will ask for full independence or full devolution might prop up new questions. But for the time being, I don't see really a design or an interest in really an annexation of all this region. And if I get second questions, Eurasianism as a doctrine, yes, it exists. It's been discussed in different circles, and it comes with different interpretations. But I would make a difference. Valeria, you can answer much better than me. I would make a difference between the military and the political circles. First of all, in Turkey, I'm not sure that the military circles are really fully prepared to leave NATO, for example, to pursue some sort of Eurasianist visions.
Well, I do agree with almost everything with you. So when it comes to, yes, this rhetoric about Eurasianism and relations with the West, I think the main, the pivot point we should start from is the fact that Turkey is just protecting and pursuing its own national interest. So the main, I will say, limiting approach of the past was just to consider Turkey anchored, towards the West, without any connections in the region. And here it comes the doctrine of zero problems with neighbors. Saying that we should, as Turkey, we should engage with any state in the region because we have historical backgrounds, we have national interests with all these partners. For example, it comes as one of the last achievements of President Erdogan, the organization of Turkish states, the Turkophone republics, that it was just launched in Samarkand couple of weeks ago. Turkey as Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and those Turkish, Uzbekistan, Turkish states. Moreover, the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus has been accepted as observatory member. So this means that also in terms of connectivity, logistically, Turkey has a global vision and tries to protect and to establish connections with all countries all over the world by pivoting on the historical backgrounds and the cultural linkages with these countries as well. When it comes to the relations with the West, I will say that we have been witnessing a sort of zigzag or ups and downs relations in the recent time. Mainly, it refers to the relations between Ankara and Moscow. As you see, anytime Ankara gets close to Moscow, then it comes the problems, for sure, from the West. So the Ankara has purchased the S-400 defense system, and then a sort of rift and problems with the Trump administration before he rose. So this is a sort of, I will say, belonging to the DNA of Turkey. And also we should consider the geographical location of the country. I always say that no one can be jealous of Turkish geographical location because it's surrounded by very uncomfortable neighbors. There are problems coming all over. So zero problems with neighbors, I will say zero neighbors without problems. Because there are issues coming all over. So you need to have a clear vision strategically of this country. And actually, when it comes the term vision, of course, I think about Erdogan, that has been considered a visionary, a man with a vision, and is using vision a lot in his electoral campaign. But as a matter of fact, when we look at the great experiment and achievement of the grain corridor between Russia, Ukraine, and all over the world, it was achieved thanks to Turkey. And in Istanbul has been established the main headquarters. Then the grain corridor was put in crisis and it was relaunched by Turkey as well. So because, it's located in a very critical geographical area, and he has to defend his own interests as well. When it comes to the occupied lands, Actually, I do not believe Turkey is a sort of country who can occupy. I mean, because on the other side, Iraq and Syria, overall nowadays, they are sovereign states. So when the military operation, they were very limited military operation in Syria were carried out, as Francesco says, they were just against a target. I mean, for a purpose, a target and in a limited scale. I don't think it's in the eastern interest of Turkey to occupy any land against a sovereign state. And when it comes to energy, already Turkey has been able, and I will remark the difference with the European Union and Italy as well, to differentiate and diversify a lot the energy supply. So we have the Trans-Anatolian pipeline coming from the Caucasus, running through Turkish corridor and then handed up to Europe, for example. The Turk Stream convoying the energy from Russia through Turkey and then going to Europe. And then we have some special connections already with the Middle Eastern countries. And now, as a matter of negotiation and talks with Russia, they are talking about convoying and conducting the Russian gas to Turkey and then selling to Europe as well. And I forgot about the anti-immigrants issues. I think, yes, immigrants is a hot topic for this electoral campaign, but I do believe that the main game will be played by the two blocs. So Erdogan, the AK Parti's party, and MHP, and Doğu Perinçek Partisi, and the table of six. And of course, about the immigrants card, I do believe that AK Party is in a sort of a critical position because it has been taking hostage of MHP, the National Movement Party, for a long time because it needs support. And of course, Devlet Bahçeli, the leader of MHP, is not so soft regarding certain issues, Kurdish issue, immigrants as well. But on the other side, the migration issue has been a sort of diamond policy of AK Party. So this is going to be a very critical balance that they try to keep, I think. And by the way, what I see in the media, there is no much rhetoric anymore about Syrian immigrants nowadays in the country. So it's going to be a very fragile issue.
I add very quickly one remark. Saying that there's no interest in occupying a certain place does not mean that you cannot use proxy actors in that conflict or in that scenario. So it's more expedient to advance your interests by local proxy actors rather than occupying, because then you have to manage that land that you occupy. And when you get into oversize, it's a problem. You have to manage the land you occupy. So what we're seeing in the Syrian conflict is a lot of proxy actors, which have in part their own targets and tools, and in parts are dependent on patrons elsewhere. Then how you label them as opposition, terrorist, labeling is you can label in very different ways. And sorry, migration. I think it's a key topic of politics everywhere. I'm not sure how many votes this group you mentioned will get in the election, but it's a topic that is raised everywhere. And I guess that the militarization of borderlines and the management in terms of order and control of migration flows is something that is seen everywhere. You see it on the border between Turkey and Iran. You see it on the border between Iran and Afghanistan, where a wall is being built. and you can also discover who is helping to build the wall between Iran and Afghanistan to prevent the flow of Afghan asylum seekers, migrants, refugees, however we want to label these human beings. Controlling migration flows is a topic of political debate everywhere right now.
Thank you for your answers. I will now pose a question that is coming from an online spectator, which deals specifically with the internal situation, and then maybe we'll get one more question from the Aula Magna. So the question about the elections is the following. Suppose the coalition of 6 wins the elections. What are the expectations of the Turkish people as to exit of Erdogan from center stage? Do they believe it will be smooth, or do they expect, God forbid, tensions to arise? So this person would like to know your own taking from this question.
I think we have already replied. I mean, the main concern will be instability, but political instability, given by the fact that there are different groups and that they have to find a compromise. And already, I think, what is my personal perception, there is a sort of fatigue in understanding who will be the leader, I mean, the candidate of the table of 6. Among them, I do not see a very charismatic leader, honestly. Meral Akşener has more probability than Kılıçdaroğlu, for sure. But I mean, Erdogan is a charismatic leader. I mean, there is no competitor right now. And also the main question mark will be also after Erdogan, because if he wins the elections this time, according to the presidential system, will be the second and the last time. So after Erdogan, what will happen within AK Party and within Turkey as well? I mean, is there anyone able to take the huge heritage that AK Party has left? And when I speak about huge heritage, I mean that the changes that have been occurred in Turkey in any level of society, university, academy, will take at least 2 different political mandates after the AK Party to I mean, go close to the situation ante AK Party. I mean, because the changes that have been occurred in Turkey have been dramatic, I will say. They were very deep changes in Turkey. And on the other side, we need to see how the young people will assess their preference, because the so-called Z generation in Turkey is the one who has just seen Erdogan, because he's in power since 2002, right? So, and they are this kind of generation who is open to the world. They use the social media, they started to go to study abroad, they apply to European projects, so they are able to create their own way of thinking and their own opinion, despite any sort of censorship within the country. So I think also the youngster will make the difference nowadays in Turkey. But I mean, I will say that in Turkey, everything is possible, right? We say Burası Türkiye, where everything can happen. I mean, society is very dynamic and very vibrant, and the political scenario is also very dynamic. So starting from today until 18th of June, if we do not go to early elections, anything really can happen.
Maybe short as possible. I'm not sure I really got the point of the question. There's no way to predict exactly what can happen. And I don't think we can lump together all the voters and sectors of Turkish society into one giant basket. Even those who can oppose Erdogan or the AKP then have different visions. I don't see, I wouldn't be so dramatic as to see if this coalition wins the election, then there's a disaster looming behind the corner. I mean, most of these people we see in this picture, they have a political history. They've been around for years. Meral Akşener had government roles before. They are not coming out of nowhere. Ahmet Davutoglu is a well-known figure. Ali Babacan is a well-known figure. You say Kılıçdaroğlu perhaps is a little less charismatic than the other ones, but there's no lack of political figures with some stature, with their own political past. They're not newcomers to politics. And I guess there are also no newcomers to political accommodation. So I wouldn't say it's a bunch of newcomers to politics. Oh, goodness, what happens if they win the election? There's all the questions I raised before, because these are, you know, open points. There's a lot of issues where they have their different point of views, but I wouldn't say this translates into necessarily disaster if they get power. I mean, most of them are center or slightly center of right politicians, and they've been around for years. So there's, you know, everything can happen, as Valeria said before, but they're certainly used to also accommodation. Also, we didn't mention, but there's other figures like Ekrem İmamoğlu or Mansur Yavaş, the mayor of Istanbul and Ankara. These are also interesting figures in Turkish politics. So, I mean, there's, if I get it right, there's no such thing as Erdogan or whatever.
Then I would like just to add that at the end of the day, Turkey is still within a frame of democracy. So in the worst case, in political instability, lack of compromise, there is also a chance to go again for elections, as it happened in the past. So, I mean, I wouldn't forecast any Arab Spring in Turkey or any revolution.
Thank you very much. Your questions, your answers were very clear, and I pretty much agree with you for what it's worth. We are going to take one final question from the in-presence public, maybe 2 questions, not more. And yes, and yeah, we will get these 2 questions and then close the.
Sorry.
Any, especially
So we are going to take the final question, and then they will reply to both, actually to the 3 of them.
Thank you. My question is, can you outline briefly the reason of the long and striking economical crisis in Turkey? It's been of unexpected length and depth. So why is just Turkey? Why even before a reason for crisis have emerged in the war scenario.
Okay, I go first briefly. The first one was about the regional issues in the light of the Turkish electorate. This is an ambivalent issue in a way that they recognize Erdogan as a leader able to stand internationally. He's the architect of the grain corridor, the leader who goes to UN and say, hey, the world is bigger than 5. So he's a leader, regional leader, and also in global leader, if we put in this way. But at the end of the day, nowadays, Turkish people are just caring about their pocket, because also AK Party, Erdogan's electorate, is suffering a lot. And there is a sort of mismatch between the middle class, which is going towards the poor position, and the higher class, which is suffering as well, because we shouldn't neglect that Turkey is a highly dependent economy. So everything is just measured according to the dollars and to euro. So I do believe that if they do not cope with the economy, inflation, and the domestic dysfunctionality, at the end, the Turkish people that they have to cope with daily life will not care that much about grain corridor or these international achievements. Okay, go. So we are going to share.
Moving on to the handshake and Turkish-Egyptian relation, I think that's definitely political as a gesture. And again, there's something that is related to Libya, which we didn't mention. But as you know, the two main factions conflicting in Libya were supported, one by Turkey and Italy, and the other by Egypt and the United Arab Emirates. So again, because the regional scenario in the Middle East is moving on, and also the alignments in the Libyan conflict is sort of moving, and again, there's no magical stick and no way to look into the glass ball and predict the future. But as you mentioned, these are maybe not sport, but huge events where some under the table diplomacy is obviously taking place. And this hand gestures is probably about very much the bilateral relations, not excluding the gas fields and exploration that we were talking about. Just one point, Egypt was in that dispute siding with Israel and Greece and France. So whether the scenario is moving to somewhere else, that's exactly what we have to closely monitor in the next weeks and months.
No, I want just to add something related to Egypt, which is a process going on since 1 year as well, when the other normalization process has started. The thing, Francesco pointed out everything very correctly. I mean, it's a regional matter related to energy, related to the regional scenario, but there is also a discriminant point, which is related to the support granted by the Turkish government to the Muslim Brotherhood, which is something that the current Egyptian government is not really able to digest. So they need to find a compromise in that regard as well.
Yeah, and about the roots of the economic crisis, I think, well, first of all, perhaps an economist would answer better than me, but it's a crisis long in blooming. The growth of the GDP in the country was prompted by the real estate investment and the infrastructure that we mentioned before. So having these huge mega infrastructures projects like the tunnel under the Bosphorus, or the third bridge, or new highways, and the real estate bubble were the drivers of the growth of the GDP. And as in other Mediterranean countries, as I see it, the bubble based on real estate investment was due to, let's say, favorable conditions of loans provided by banks, by the banking system. And when this mechanism, as any bubble, just burst out, we've seen different, perhaps, trajectories, but Spain, Lebanon, we have closely comparisons possible. It's, similar mechanism of, very, let's say, generous loans provided by banks. This money is invested in the real estate. You build a lot and a lot and a lot. And all these billions of cubic meters are not sold.
I would like to answer, to add just the fact that the so-called Erdoganomics, which is just focusing on lowering down the interest rate, according to his vision, which is not a conventional economic vision, I'm not an economist, but it's, it aims at attracting foreign investment in the country, and here it comes the new relations with the Gulf countries, which are investing a lot in Turkey nowadays, and to boost the exports. So according to Erdogan, by lowering down the interest rate, again, the economic stability will be maintained. And he's using this rhetoric a lot by saying we have a new vision and we are proposing something new, also economically, which is going to mark the difference from the West. He openly says. So this lowering down the interest, because we wanted to show that we are strong and we are in an independent country as well.
But then this sort of keeping very low the interest rate was conflicting with the other necessity of controlling the inflation rate. So,
but of course, there is a political connotation here as well, because in this way he's flirting with the most Islamist groups within the Turkish society and the Turkish electorate as well. So it's a very complicated frame.
That's because in a way, just to explain for perhaps the very idea of the interest rate is sort of taboo for some Islamist groups, and there's this whole idea of building up an Islamic finance that has no interest rate, basically. But this sort of Islamic finance has sort of worked partially only in one country, Malaysia, for very specific reasons. And exporting these ideas is kind of difficult. Then perhaps there's also the role of the former minister, Berat Albayrak, but then we're putting names and surnames, but it's more of a mechanism that we've seen also in other Mediterranean countries.
Okay, unfortunately, we have to stop here, even though we would have had much more to be discussed. So I would just like to thank you once again, everyone who has come to this talk, both online and in presence. And yeah, I hope to see you again for the next appointments of this cycle of conferences. So thank you again to Professor Zatti and to our speakers as well, who have been outstanding in my opinion. And of course, thank you to the Collegio Cairoli for hosting this great event. Thank you very much.